I've been surrounded by remote work almost my entire adult life, both for good and bad. And now as the pandemic is pushing remote work into the collective consciousness, there are some areas where I think people get it right and some areas where I think they get it wrong. I'm going to share with you an international perspective. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. And I have been surrounded by remote work, again, almost my entire adult life. I'm looking back to the mid-2000s. I was pretty new in business. I had started my first business 19, 20 years old. It obviously kind of got off to a rocky start as I figured out exactly what I wanted to do. But what I do remember was I had one of those old VoIP phones, Voice over Internet Protocol, where you'd plug the phone into your modem and you would be able to make phone calls. I was making a lot of phone calls back then, old school. And so I remember thinking to myself, I could take this thing, I could take this little box, this VoIP box, I could be doing this on an island somewhere. And for a while, I stayed in the United States. And then I realized that for a lot of reasons, I would like to live somewhere else. And then I started traveling and I started using the emerging technology to be able to work from anywhere. I remember one time I felt pretty good about myself because I had a business partner for a while. And I went to China for like 2 weeks and he didn't even realize that I was there. And so this was some of the early days of remote work for me. But now usually this is a topic that so many people are discussing, and you would think a company called Nomad Capitalist would be all in on remote work. And yet that's not entirely the case for a couple of reasons. And I want to share this with you today. I am an advocate of building great workplaces, but I do remember I had a meeting with some Nomad Capitalist customers going back a number of years ago now in Asia. There was a guy coming, and I didn't know exactly what to make of what he said, but I thought he made a good point. I just didn't know how good it was. He said, it's one thing, guys, you're sitting around, you're building your side hustle, you're building your lifestyle business in Malaysia, in Thailand, in wherever. He says, eventually, if you want to build a $100 million, $200, $300 million company, you're not going to do that in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Now, is that entirely correct? Is it impossible to do that? No. And certainly what I've seen recently is just because someone has a Western passport doesn't mean that they're a better talent than someone with a lesser passport. In fact, sometimes I think it's the opposite. But I do think that there's not only a mindset issue, but there's also just a cultural issue from saying if you want to build something big, there's probably going to be a different perspective than the earlier days when you were more nomadic, if you've been a digital nomad or you've been in remote work. And so one of the things that I look at here at Nomad Capitalist is we obviously want to be tax efficient and we want to be bureaucracy efficient. For me, if you told me I have to pay some tax, but there's really not that many forms to fill out, I'd be open to doing that. I value time, hassle, anxiety, i.e. the lack of those things, more than I value a certain amount of money. I don't want to pay you 50%. I don't want to pay you 25% potentially, but I'm willing to pay more than what a lot of other people are paying if I get a lifestyle benefit from living and doing business in your country. But here's the challenge. If you have employees around the world, one of the things that I see with people we work with is depending on where they're located, you may have a tax issue and not even know it. For example, if you have someone who is a salesperson, this is probably one of the worst jobs someone can have and do remotely. You have an offshore company. You've done everything perfectly. Your tax rate is 0 or 1 or 5%. Fantastic, right? Then you realize that having a salesperson in the US or some other Western countries could be the kiss of death. And so for remote work, what I see when I talk to the occasional employee or someone, an entrepreneur's spouse as an employee, that kind of thing, is that they have limitations on where they can go because their company was smart and figured out, hey, we don't want to have to necessarily get into the tax arena with all these different countries that people may be going to. Now, certainly if you live in Dubai, that's going to be a lot easier to manage than if you live in Des Moines. But these are things that employers have to consider. And when your tax structure is more optimized, when you're following the Nomad Capitalist approach of having a low tax rate, then you are more vulnerable because you're probably not going to be entitled to certain things like treaties or other kind of relief that would allow you to have this remote workforce. And so for one reason, as an employer, remote workforces can certainly be a little bit difficult. Now, in our company, we do have certain positions that are remote. I do believe, as an old school business person, that certain positions, number one, entry-level positions where people are training, and we have a lot of this in our company. I mean, how many companies can you go to and work at where you're dealing with UAE company formations, St. Lucia citizenship, Antigua tax residents living in Malaysia, real estate in Cambodia. I mean, there's really not a lot of places to go and learn this. So what we have to put a lot of effort into training people very much hands-on. And so for us, it's a lot less anxiety inducing. It's a lot better. And I think a lot of people who work on our teams agree just to be able to do that in person. One of the things that I think people get wrong about remote work is you go on LinkedIn, for example. I mean, I don't know if it's just my feed or this is what LinkedIn is all about. I see a lot of people complaining about how companies and bosses and employers are like the scum of the earth. And it's like, the hours are too long, and he said something mean to me on Friday, and they made me do this, and I had to wear a shirt. And it's like just complaint after complaint after complaint on this LinkedIn. I don't know, leave a comment below. Maybe I just have the wrong LinkedIn feed. But I go on there and I think to myself, you know what? These people, they talk about things like privilege. And yet they sit in the Western world where remote work is a thing. Let me tell you a story about some of our teams. We opened up an office in Yerevan. When I say an office, I mean we started hiring people there about a year and a half ago, a little more. And people were working remotely at first because as entrepreneurs, it's a very entrepreneurial business, we kind of dip our toe in and we see, is this going to be a good market and what's going to happen? And if we only end up finding 2 people, let's not get a big office. We eventually purchased an office and we eventually formalized the whole workforce and did all of that. But you know what happened when we got to the 3rd or 4th person and we started doing some meetups and we'd fly in some of the managers to do training, all that kind of thing, was people were saying, when are we going to have an office? And so then we found kind of like a rented space, and it was good, but it wasn't perfect. And so finally we decided we're going to buy a prime city center office where people who occasionally come to Armenia, when they're working with us, they can go there, they can chill out, they can work with the team can come into the office. And it really was because, in a sense, it was at least motivated to push forward with the fact that people were saying, when's there going to be an office? We want an office. We want to come together. Oh, we met so-and-so who also works here. We want to work together. And I think that this idea, certainly, remote work is somewhat of a global phenomenon. It's talked about everywhere. But I do think that, just as we talk about cultures being different, Western cultures have been faster to embrace this, faster to demand this. And I think that there are certain people in the West who probably get drowned out, who like the idea of going into an office, like the idea of having camaraderie. I'll tell you what, one of the things that I have to, as much as I like to be fashionable in a sense, is I have to push myself to dress nicely. I believe in dressing nicely when you work. I just like dressing nicely. And when you sit at home, we really have a thing where it's like, hey, can we not work in our pajamas? Now, I know that saying that makes me the modern-day Osama bin Laden in some circles, but I happen to believe when you're working with very high-level people, it's a sign of respect. It's a sign of respect to yourself, to the clients, to everybody, to say, I'm going to dress nicely. And I can tell you, working at home for many of these years, when I go into some of our offices and I go in and sit there, whether it's for a week or whether it's for 3 months, I feel a lot more productive. I feel personally empowered. I love, getting into the vibe of going in and spending time with people. There's an energy of stuff that's being done. I've always felt a certain loneliness. Now, I am the nomad. This is what I do. I travel around. I have different homes. But I think that for the average person who's staying in one place, there is a certain amount of go into the office that's beneficial. And so I think the idea, if you're looking to hire internationally, that it's going to be the same as what you're used to in California is simply not true. I think if you're planning it, listen, plenty of companies are doing remote. I'm not saying that our people are the only voices where they are. Lots of companies are hiring in places like Serbia and Armenia. Some of them got the idea from right here. But I do think that there are plenty of people, both in the West and elsewhere, who want to go to the office. And my thought simply is this. I think everyone should be able to make a choice. I do believe that in the Western world, again, when I go into my LinkedIn, I believe in rewarding people who are here in our company. I believe in growth opportunities. I believe in having perks. But you know what I do see in the West? I see a lot of people for whom it's never good enough. I see people for whom, hey, you know what? Show up 15 minutes late if your child needs some help. I don't care. Just show up to the meeting late. You stay 15 minutes late? Seems not. Do you work on the weekends to make it up? No. There's this culture in the West. Listen, I'm a Midwestern American Protestant by birth, by nature, by everything I've done. I don't expect people to work as much as I do. If you don't work with me directly, when quitting time bell rings, go on home. But my concern about the greater culture where it's not so much about remote work in some places. It's about this aspect of, I'm going to do nothing for you. Because I go on my LinkedIn and I see people like, why would you be loyal to anybody? Why would you ever respect a company? Why would you ever do anything? Lots of, I'm not going to do this for you. But you know what? Yeah, don't bother me at 6:01. I'll come in late if I want. If my child's screaming and yelling. By the way, this thing about my child is screaming and yelling, I always thought as someone who has a lot of younger people in the company, how unfair is that to somebody who doesn't have a child to use as an excuse to be 15 minutes late, that they just show up on time? I always thought that was kind of unfair. And again, listen, I know some of what I'm saying is greatly unpopular. We have a number of people who in our company who do or have worked remotely, who do travel for work, who work at home sometimes, who work at home because they're the only person in a certain place, or they're one of two people in a certain place and there's no office there, or we have many different arrangements. But I think that my general thought on the state of work in the West, I don't see this in many other places in the world, is it really about work? Now, maybe if you work at a company and you are on the other side of the table than I am, if you're the employee, maybe you don't like that. And I understand it perhaps is quite unpopular. But for me, we're trying to build something here. And, this idea of, I don't really care when you work or how you work as long as you get the work done. You know what? I thought that many, many years ago, again, when I was just starting out in business. How do you measure that? Obviously, easier to measure with a seasoned executive who knows how to work, who knows processes, who doesn't need a lot of training. What if you're brand new in the job and you want to learn something and you don't know what to do? Who's going to be training you if you decide to work at 1 a.m? And I'm not saying I'm the foremost expert on these topics, but the idea that we're going to take people who, in my mind, in Western societies, increasingly looking for every way not to work. We just saw something in Portugal recently. You're forbidden to email or to message your team after closing hours, which I'm sure, like in Portugal, you got to stop working at 3:30 in the afternoon, and you start working at 10:15, and 10:15 really means 11:15, and you get 2 hours for lunch, and you get 232 days a year off or something like that. Again, am I going to message an entry-level or a mid-level person in my company? No. But if you're vying to become the COO of my company and something comes to mind that we need to address, I'll send you a message. I don't feel badly about that. And so as a result, I guess I'm not going to be hiring anybody on track to be my COO in Portugal. I'll refer you back to point number 1. I don't want the tax implications of running a business from Portugal. And so there are countries where you can hire, whether you want to hire remotely or not, where the tax systems are more open to you coming and hiring people. After all, you'd think if you're a country in this great remote work thing, here's the other thing about remote work, is that people don't think that you can hire people somewhere else. People think that oh great, I live in the United States and now I can go work remotely in Portugal. Okay, well that's great. You know who makes less money? People in Portugal. Or heck, as soon as I'm in Portugal, why don't I consider Montenegro? Or why don't I consider Indonesia, right? Which is actually a country we looked at recently. And so again, there's this kind of one-way street where it's why don't I have the power to go work somewhere else? Well, it's you know what? It's the same thing that California is saying to all of its residents. Where are you going to go? I'll go to Florida. Once I'm in Florida, I can go to Puerto Rico. Once I'm there, I can go to Panama or Dubai. I can go and I can lower my taxes. I can improve my lifestyle all I want. And so this is not me being angry at these people. We've built a team of people that I feel very proud of. And again, some work in an office, some work remotely. But I feel that this is part of a greater discussion. Look at the tax implications. Look at the productivity implications. Look at the real world implications. In this regard, I want to be the merchant of truth. The idea that somebody's going to be most productive at 1 a.m, hey, listen, I understand. I'm productive at 1 a.m, but you know what? I'm responsible to me. Nobody's paying me a salary. And so also no one's around to help me at 1 a.m. unless I'm in a different time zone. And so this discussion to me is another reason why you want to hire somewhere else. I'm not saying don't hire in Serbia or hire in some of the countries we're talking about and then choose not to have an office. Maybe your Serbians or your Armenians will not want an office, unlike some of the people that work in our office. But I think you'll see a marked difference in terms of people who are just used to work. No country is perfect, no culture is perfect, but I think that on this issue. It's worth going where you're treated best and finding people who match your values. My view on this is very simple. And by the way, I'm happy for anyone who wants to work for my company to know everything I'm saying, because I like to be extremely transparent and straightforward with people. I will tell you all the problems, all the things, all the reasons you'll not like working here. And if you make it past that, then we can talk. But, you know, in my world, let's go back to making a relationship in business like a relationship in dating. You know what? Some of us may not match up. I may be less focused on remote work than you want to be because certain positions aren't as remote friendly, in my opinion. If you don't like that, you don't have to work here. But again, there's a certain toxicity happening right now in the world where it's not just that, hey, we're not a fit. Just like you go on a first date with someone, we're not a fit. I wish you luck. There's a certain angle, again, I think largely from Western-centric cultures, where, oh, you're not remote, you're a terrorist. And I push back on that because I think that while it works for many positions, it's not as good for people who are learning stuff, not as good for entry level, not as good for people. I mean, when you look at our team of case managers, they're constantly going back and forth in the way that I think we've agreed with them is probably more efficient. They'll just reach over and say, hey, have you done this or that before? And they, yeah. You do this and you go there and you do that. And that's been more efficient. Can you do that in Slack? Can you do that in Telegram? Can you do that online? You can, for sure. We've made this decision, and I think for all the reasons mentioned, it's worth having a more seasoned approach to remote work than simply opening the floodgates. Again, if your company's paying high taxes, if your company's largely US-based, for example, that may be a different story. But for international companies, I think those are some things to consider. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.